You know, Westminster has a population of about 1/3 men and 2/3 women. And a lot of people forget that women could not vote most of the times in this country until the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And tonight we're going to get a 21st century iteration of what happens if you continue to grow and let the value of the 19th Amendment grow. And I'm going to be very careful in my remarks in introducing our speaker because there is so much here. But not only is she here, but her mother and father here. They're very distinguished journalists themselves. And so let me, just to be sure, those of you who don't know, I'll give you a good rundown with a lot of information. But Emily Ramshaw is the president and the CEO of the 19th, the nation's first independent, not-profit newsroom at the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. The 19th aims to alleviate the voices of women, to elevate the voices of women. You now know why I wanted to read this. I'm absolutely sure. The women left at the margins of American media with free to consume and free to republish daily journalism, newsletters, and live events. Prior to the 19th, Ramshaw was editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune, which many of us subscribe to on a regular basis, an award-winning local news startup that is the largest state house news operation in the nation. She's the outgoing board chair of the Pulitzer Prize, where she served for 9 years. In 2020, Ramshaw was also named to Fortune's 400 Under 40 list. Ramshaw started her career at the Dallas Morning News, where she brokered national stories about abuse inside Texas youth lockups, reported from inside a West Texas polygamous compound, and uncovered fight clubs at state institutions for people with disabilities. She's a native of Washington, D.C. She graduated from Northwestern University in 2003 with dual degrees in journalism and American history. She lives here in Austin with her filmmaker husband and their 9-year-old daughter. And right now, her husband and daughter are running errands that normally she would be out running. So she's giving us her evening and letting them take her role as father and daughter. But Emily, we're glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay in the back? Working all right? All right, good. I'll keep projecting. Well, it is such an honor to be with you all tonight and to have the chance to share the story of the 19th, which is a nonprofit newsroom I launched just a few years ago that is, as Max said, committed to lifting up the voices, not alleviating, but lifting up the voices, little Freudian slip, of women in American journalism. And so I want to give a big thank you to Max, who made it possible for me to be here tonight with all of you. The truth is that the 19th would not be here, would not be as strong as it was without Max, without his family, and without the legacy of his beloved wife, Jean Alice. So thank you, Max, thank you, Lynn and Meredith, for supporting the 19th and making it possible. This is my favorite slide. So before I dive into the 19th, I just want to share a little bit about my own journey in journalism. I was raised by two Washington correspondent parents who also happen to be future Westminster residents, Greg Ramshaw of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour and Mary Leonard Ramshaw of the Boston Globe, among many other newspapers. They are the reason that I do what I do every single day, and you will be lucky to get to hang out with them very soon. So you can see them. This is, I don't know what year this was. This is probably sometime in the 1970s, given the collars, but looks great. So I grew up, as Max said, in Washington, D.C., but my first newspaper job was as a reporter for the Dallas Morning News. It's what brought me to Texas. You can see my parents loved that I ended up on a billboard here that said tracking sex offenders. Not exactly the ideal advertisement. But I started my career in Texas covering night cops and city hall, investigating, malfeasance in state agencies and institutions. The Dallas Morning News sent me to Austin to cover the state legislature, where I fell in love with state politics, with our fine city, and with my now husband. And within a couple of years, I left the Dallas Morning News to help start the Texas Tribune, which many of you know and are familiar with this idea that Texas really deserved high quality news and information and deserved to be able to access it for free. So I would spend a decade at the Texas Tribune, serving as editor-in-chief and the right hand of Evan Smith, who many of you probably know and also watch on TV or have heard his boisterous interviews many places. So I loved my job at the Texas Tribune, but my thinking about my responsibility to American journalism really changed in 2016 when Hillary Clinton lost her bid for president. I had been reading so many headlines about her likability, her electability. Was she too shrill? Did she wear too many pantsuits? So many stories were so sexist and they prioritized absolutely the wrong things. And I thought a lot about what I could do as a journalist to help change that. But I had just had a very tiny little baby girl, and to be honest, I couldn't really see past the spit up and diapers to think about what that next step might be. I love this picture of both of us looking totally beat in that picture. But finally, ahead of the 2020 election, with 4 other amazing women by my side, I decided to launch the 19th, which is a national nonprofit newsroom with a really specific mission, and that is to center the voices and experiences of women in the American story. And so a little bit about the very beginning of the 19th. We started at a really, really turbulent moment in our country. We launched 6 weeks before the pandemic. I mean, not a great time to be starting a business. It was 9 months before the 2020 election, and if you remember that election, Joe Biden spent most of it campaigning from a bunker in a basement. Not a great campaign trail to get your start as an organization. And then, of course, amid really a racial reckoning. And we wanted at the 19th to ensure that everyone, not just the powerful, not just the privileged, had access to the news and information that they needed to navigate their lives and to participate as fully as possible in our democracy, particularly at that critical time. So we named our newsroom, as Max said, the 19th in honor of the 19th Amendment. With men, I often have to explain it's not the 19th hole, which apparently is the bar at the end of the golf game, but the 19th Amendment, the one that granted women the right to vote. We also chose that name with a really clear-eyed understanding that the fight for gender equity did not end in 1920. In fact, many women, particularly women of color, were left out of that promise until well into the civil rights movement. And so our name is both a celebration and also a call to action. We launched as a nonprofit instead of a for-profit for a variety of reasons. First, we really wanted a newsroom that was free to read, so no paywalls, no subscriptions, because we believed that trustworthy journalism was a public good, a public service. And in a world where so much news and information is either behind a paywall or tangled up in misinformation, we wanted to keep our journalism accessible to everyone, no matter their background or their resources. Second, we wanted to give our journalism away for free, not just to readers, but to every other newsroom in the country that might need it. So at the 19th, we partner with hundreds of news organizations around the country to let them republish our stories. This means that a story the 19th writes might appear in your local newspaper, whether that's the Statesman or the Amarillo Globe, or on any other local news website. If you have an iPhone, we're also on platforms like Apple News or Samsung News. So you can find the 19th's reporting alongside other trusted sources. We're trying to reach readers wherever they are in this completely fractured media environment. And then finally, we wanted to do something that was just almost completely unheard of in the media industry, and that is very expensive. And we wanted to offer our colleagues world-class benefits. So Things like 6 months of fully paid maternity leave for everyone on our staff, 4 months of fully paid elder care leave, 100% coverage of health care benefits for not just our staff, but also their dependents. So many people on our team, I knew if I was starting an almost exclusively women-run organization, so many folks on our team are in the sandwich generation of navigating tiny kids and elderly parents, and those kinds of pressures, as so many of you know, are often a reason that women leave all kinds of fields, particularly media, where it's a pretty demanding grind. And so we really wanted to make sure we took all the sharp objects off the table that allowed women to stay in this field for the full duration of their careers. So these are a few faces that you all might recognize. Over the past few years, the 19th has had the privilege of hosting some truly remarkable events. Some of the people you're seeing on this screen, even when we were just a few days old at the 19th, agreed to participate because they were so excited about what we were building. So we've welcomed people like former First Lady Michelle Obama, Secretary Hillary Clinton, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, even Meghan Markle showed up for one of our events. You may have heard of her. She might end up in your Facebook feed. These kinds of events really give our community a chance to hear from some of the women who have shaped history and are shaping the future. They also really reinforce our mission, which is elevating voices that inspire, inform, and move us all toward a more just and equitable society. So what our reporters at the 19th cover? They cover some of the most important issues of our time, certainly our lifetimes. Reproductive health, including abortion laws and access in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. Many of our reproductive health stories on Apple News get 1 or 2 million views an hour. That's how widely read they are on those platforms. We deeply covered child care and elder care and the people who are overwhelmingly women and primarily women of color who provide it. Voting rights and how communities are being empowered or disempowered at the ballot box since we're named for the 19th Amendment. Immigration, obviously this week, this has been front and center for us, and the effects of those policies, particularly on women and on families. And of course, the role of women in the economy and how race and gender influence our opportunities to succeed and to thrive. And so at the 19th, we also try to be a reader-centered newsroom. That means we don't just cover problems, we also really try to offer solutions. We answer readers' questions when they write in and ask them, or respond to our newsletters asking for more information. We provide resources, we help them figure out how to get involved. We want people to come away from our journalism not just informed or angry or outraged, but really empowered to take action and also to feel some hope in a time that is pretty dark, if we're honest about it. So the 19th has made just truly incredible progress over the last 5 years since we got this baby newsroom off the ground. We thought that we would have reach a readership of 20 million last year, which was a huge number by our standards. We ended up exceeding 57 million readers last year. We hoped within the next 3 years we would reach 75 million readers annually. We're actually going to cross that number this year. And so we've exceeded our goals to something like 120 million over the next 2 years, which is just a sign of how deeply women, who are over half of the population, are engaged right now and want to be involved. Our journalism has led to some major policy changes. We've had federal judges forced to recuse themselves or step off the bench from cases where they have conflicts that the 19th has exposed, particularly around reproductive health. We got the federal government to crack down on dangerous child care centers after a series of stories we wrote about unfortunately deadly cases in child care centers that were supposed to be under federal supervision. We now have a staff of 60. We have journalists in 25 states, which is amazing for an organization that was just 5 of us 5 years ago. And we run an incredible $4 million a year fellowship program for young women journalists from historically black colleges and universities, including Houston Tillotson here in our backyard. Last year we had 10 fellows, and by the end of the fellowship, 9 of the 10 had full-time employment in American newsrooms, which in this economy and this market is just truly extraordinary. This year we also launched our first ever endowment campaign to try to really help the 19th stand the test of time so that we exist far beyond all of us. So those are some really exciting things. I also want to talk about some of the sort of dark side of this moment, because being a journalist right now is really, really tough. The 19th and its journalists face really serious risks in this moment. Of course, rising threats to the First Amendment, increased hostility toward the press. I mean, you try sending a young Black woman reporter to a Trump rally these days, and you have to provide full-time security for that reporter. Really dangerous misinformation campaigns. We're seeing a lot of this even right now around the COVID vaccine as an example, and information about whether children should be getting the COVID vaccine. Our reporters who cover women's rights, who cover women of color in particular, and who cover LGBTQ rights are often targeted with harassment and threats of violence. It is a challenging and incredibly difficult environment for journalists who are committed to telling the truth. And I think, I ran a news organization in Texas for a decade, and we never, ever faced the kind of threats that I've faced in 5 years running an organization centered on women. So it's been pretty astonishing. And the biggest development in my family's life in the last year or so is that I'm actually currently the defendant in a defamation lawsuit lodged against me by President Trump and every other member of the Pulitzer Prize board over a prize we gave 6 years ago that he simply does not like. And so it's a sort of this environment. I cannot stress enough how difficult it is to continue to do the work of independent journalism in a moment where the deck is really stacked against you. So those are the sort of challenges, in addition to, obviously the critical benefits of the work we do in this moment. So this is why the work the 19th does isn't just important, it is also, I believe, deeply courageous. Journalism like ours depends on people who believe in a free and fair press, and it's also, as you all know, vital to a healthy democracy. I'm really actually grateful to see such a full room tonight. I am so impressed that all of you came, because the 19th and the work of journalists like ours, we stand on your shoulders, and that's not an exaggeration. The rights that we have today, the freedom for women to vote, for people of color to participate in civic life, to raise our collective voices, to protest, those rights didn't come easy. They came because generations before us marched and organized and voted and sacrificed. Many of you lived through and fought for the civil rights movement. You lived through second and now third wave feminism and fought to shatter the glass ceiling. There are a lot of women in this room who probably worked jobs where you weren't always paid what you deserved, or you were raising families in a world that didn't always see or value your labor. And that history, our shared history, is exactly what we are trying to honor and carry forward at the 19th. So what's next for us at the 19th? First and foremost, it's surviving the next 3 years and 8 months, not that any of us are counting, trying to keep our heads above water in this administration, in this environment. At a time when many institutions are folding, whether that's law firms or universities or even some other newsrooms, the 19th is standing firm. This is honestly the work that we were made for, and my journalists, our team at the 19th, we are not going to back down, no matter what comes at us in this moment. We are expanding our journalism in communities that are often overlooked, so among immigrants, in rural areas, in the American South. We are expanding our journalism to all the new social media platforms where young readers are, and we're creating more tools to help readers of all ages better understand how policy affects their daily lives, how to tell misinformation from real information, how to ensure you're not getting scammed, and how to ensure you have digital literacy, media literacy, and know that you can trust the news that you're reading. Our vision is simple, but I think it's really ambitious, and that's an American media that reflects the full diversity of this country, even at a time when lots of folks' identities are being scrubbed off of federal websites. A media that doesn't just inform, but really includes, and a media where everyone can see themselves reflected regardless of their gender or their race. So, some of you have asked even earlier, how do I get involved? How do I help? How do I get engaged with the 19th? Also, isn't this like such a beautiful staff? This was last year, so we're even bigger than that, but they're a wonderful group of people. The first thing you can do is simply read and share the 19th stories, which helps us grow our community and really spread important information. You can do that on our website, which is 19thnews.org. We have a wonderful free daily email newsletter. A lot of folks they don't want to have to go to a website. They want the news to come to them every day. And so if you go to our homepage, you can sign up for that free newsletter. It's wonderful. It's on the right-hand side of the homepage. You can also follow us on social media if you're on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or any of those platforms. You can follow our videos on YouTube. And of course, we're a nonprofit newsroom, so if you're able, we are a member-supported newsroom. If you're able to support us financially, we'd love that. It could be a one-time donation of $19. It could be a monthly recurring donations. Members really are what help us keep our journalism free for those who cannot afford to support us financially. And also there's some cards out here floating around that give you a little more information on how to do that. And then finally, the best way is word of mouth. It's telling your friends and family about the 19th, it's signing up for our newsletter, or reading us on Apple News, sharing those links, texting it to your daughters or your granddaughters or your friends. It's been really meaningful for us to sort of build this robust community of readers, and particularly special that we were able to start this national venture in Austin, Texas, which is has been just such a hospitable place for us to get our start. So that's the sort of backstory of the 19th. I'm excited to talk to all of you about your experiences. I know we have folks in this room who've even owned community newspapers, who have kids who are journalists, or are just trying to sort of figure out how best to consume news and information in this environment. And I'll get out from behind the formality of this podium, and I was hoping we could just have a conversation. So does that sound good, Max?
Is this mic still working?
Yes.
I'm going to give this to Lynn Sherman and let him watch for you. If you have questions, probably the best thing in the world would be to have a Q&A and let Emily respond to your questions.
You might have one?
I know there are going to be some good ones in here. Don't be shy. Meredith's kicking us off.
I love Trib Fest. Will you be there this year?
I'm always there because I bleed Texas Tribune yellow. Anything Evan Smith asks me to do, I do. So I'm sure many of you have been to Trib Fest, but it is it's late this year, by the way. Mark your calendars. It's not until November. You can thank the UT football schedule for that, which means it won't be nearly as hot as it normally is. But yes, it's such a special way to convene and have that dialogue and to really get to engage with people face to face, which is the best way to do it. Lynn, we're going to make you get a workout tonight. Sorry.
I need one.
Have you had the opportunity to put your paper, your communications into other languages?
That's a great question. So we've started using AI to translate some of our stories into Spanish, obviously with the support of an editor, but Spanish is the primary way that we've been translating our work. And that's been really significant. We in the first few years of the 19th, we had a full-time partnership with Univision, where they translated all of our work into Spanish and distributed it, and we had our Spanish-speaking reporters talking about the 19th journalism on the air. So that's been a meaningful partnership, and you're seeing more and more newsrooms now doing that. Occasionally, even I see the New York Times translating work into Chinese, where there's stories that are of particular interest to those audiences. So yes, good question. You're gonna have to run for that one, Lynn.
Get my
All
exercise.
the way in the back.
I apologize for being late, and you may have covered this and I missed it,
Perfect.
but what specifically can we do, what you might know about our community here at Westminster, of mostly older people? I've done the marches and I've done the protests at the Capitol and all that, but what can we do? I wear a message shirt every day. I have every day since the second week of the Trump administration, because I just felt like I had to do something. I couldn't figure out what to do. Can you tell us what what we can do?
I wish I had all the answers because you're doing a lot of it. But I think the most important thing you can do, regardless of your political affiliation, if you are trying to get more people engaged, you know, we all have friends who say, you know what, I just don't have time to be engaged on this issue, or I'm gonna focus on, for me, it's, people who say, I'm focusing on my kid's school, I'm focusing on church, I'm just gonna put my head in the sand for the next 3 years and hope we get out the other side of it. And it's a luxury, it's such a luxury to say, I'm just not interested in politics, or I just can't be engaged right now. And I feel a pretty enormous responsibility in the people the 19th serves, but also in my peer group to remind people what a luxury that is and how many people don't have that luxury. Interestingly, at the 19th, our readership is about 60% non-white. We reach a lot of women of color, which for a news organization, a digital news organization, is almost unheard of. So much news readership is white. However, I actually think right now our biggest responsibility is to meet and reach those white women off the coasts who are saying we're disengaged and we're not involved. Because if you look, the outcomes of our recent elections in many ways have been the result of the opinions of white women. And so I think actually it's interesting to have over-indexed so high for us on women of color and now be saying, actually, we need to reach moderate white women. How do we reach those disengaged white women? And so some of the ways we're doing that actually is through social media. It's, if you're not on Instagram, your kids probably are. There's some big viral trend called a get ready with me video, which is ridiculous, and it's just basically like women putting on their makeup for the day. Well, the 19th started making get ready with me videos on the child tax credit, or on what you need to know about the new CDC regulations around the COVID vaccine. What are ways that we can get those women who are less likely to be politically engaged, how do we feed them their vegetables with a candy coating, right? And we think about that a lot. So anyway, I don't know that I answered your question. You're doing all the right things, but yeah, get your peers engaged.
I teach economics, and one of the issues that I observe and read about is the issues with young males. And so I was thinking, you have a senior care, you have a child care, have you thought about putting out a column on young men care? Because it appears, if you look at what is going on in this country, we have a lot of young men whose sense of success is going home to living with mommy and dad.
This is such a great point, because when we started the 19th, all we really thought about was women, right? We were aiming to serve women. But pretty quickly, we changed our messaging and mission to be around gender, not just about women, because there were so many important stories about men, actually, and the ways that these sort of gender roles and norms had been sort of unsettled. And so we've been doing a lot more reporting in the last year, sort of about masculinity, what masculinity means, the sort of divide we're seeing in higher education outcomes between young women and young men, the ways that the Trump campaign and candidacy really sort of has tapped into some sort of deep-seated resentments and anger among young white men. So I think actually, interestingly, our newsletter readership is 50% men, which was a huge surprise to me, because I thought our website readership is overwhelmingly women. But that gives me some kind of indication actually that men are getting more engaged on these issues. Either they're aiming to be allies, and that's why they're engaged, or they're sensing some of these big divides too and are trying to figure out what to do about it. But I think that's interesting. Maybe you should write a column about that.
Hi, my name is Brandy, and I'm one of those people you pointed to.
Brandy, where are you? Oh, there you go. Hi.
I am a local media outlet owner, and
What local media outlet?
the Austin Common,
Awesome. Great.
and we take typically dry civic information and make it digestible, cute, fun, understandable, shareable kind of stuff, largely Instagram and newsletter style. So my question is I want to learn from you for our sake, but also so people can understand
Put the mic close
where
to
is
you.
your support coming from? Like, how are you getting sponsorship, or that's a big budget. That's a lot of people. I'm really impressed. fast. And like, tell me a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes that keep this engine growing.
Well, if you're familiar with the Texas Tribune, you know that Evan Smith is an incredible fundraiser, and I learned from the best. I watched him for a lot of years. I would watch him go into donor meetings, and someone would say, "I'd like to support the Tribune with $50,000," and I would have fallen on the floor with gratitude, and Evan says, "Well, that's not enough." And so I still have 5 years in, I have not learned that strategy. I still fall on the floor with gratitude. But the 19th is almost entirely philanthropically funded, so we're about a $13 million a year operation, and we're raising a $30 million endowment right now, and that is a lot of travel, a lot of fundraising. I now have a 7-person fundraising team, but I'm still the closer for almost all of those big gifts, and so it is a lot of big names you might know, people like Melinda Gates or Laureen Powell Jobs, and it's also close to 60,000 people who give us $19 a year. So it really does run the gamut, and those tiny gifts are just as important as the $1 million gifts. But it is for a lot of nonprofit newsrooms, and I drink the nonprofit Kool-Aid. You know, the amazing thing about having, I think we have 9,000 different donors over $1,000. And the amazing thing about that is that nobody gets to put their thumb on the scale. You know, I'm not beholden to any advertisers. I can give my journalism away for free everywhere because I don't need people to come to my website for a particular advertiser. It really is, it's a luxury, I think, to be a nonprofit. It's a lot of work because you shake trees constantly and you have to convince people that journalism is critical to the preservation of our democracy. But I think, especially in this moment, people believe that more than ever. And so we've been able to do really well in that regard. But it's a hustle, for sure. And I'm very grateful to have very amazing grandparents who keep tabs on my 9-year-old when I'm on the road. So. I know that Westminster is a nonprofit, which is fascinating to me, and has a nonprofit board and all that. So yes, so you all know how these budgets get built. So.
Any other questions?
Uh-oh.
This is not fair.
This doesn't seem, yeah. Lynn, hand it to somebody else.
Given your editorial or given your repertorial topics, how do you keep from editorializing? It would seem to me that by virtue of the stories you pursue, it would be very easy to slip into endorsing positions or assigning people to come up with ideas that would sound like editorializing to others.
That's a good question, and it's something we grapple with a lot, because just by virtue of the fact that we cover gender equity, you know, there are a lot of folks on the far right who think that women should be pumping out more babies and that, you know, gender equity is not really a priority. But the thing about the 19th is that we will take for granted, look, we take a stand on one thing, which is that women deserve the same opportunities as men in every circumstance, and we don't think that should be partisan. We don't, you know, and so we cover everyone without fear or favor. We wrote about how long it took Biden to talk about, you know, reproductive health in his administration. We cover both sides of the aisle very aggressively, but we don't play the sort of both sides game. I mean, I remember being a baby reporter at the Dallas Morning News and covering reproductive health in Texas. And the Department of State Health Services put out a pamphlet that said that abortion led to breast cancer. And I was assigned the story to write that the Department of State Health Services in Texas was putting out this literature saying abortion led to breast cancer. There was absolutely no scientific evidence whatsoever. Quite the contrary, it had been debunked. But I was expected to write this story, you know, putting both sides in the story, even though one side of the story was completely factually inaccurate. And so I tell that story because we don't do that at the 19th. If something is factually inaccurate, we call it factually inaccurate. We don't say it's the opinion of the state that abortion leads to breast cancer when that is misinformation. And so I think after January 6th, we had a hard conversation we had used this terminology to call the 19th bipartisan. And after January 6th, we changed the framing of our website to say that we were independent, lowercase I independent, not political party independent, but that we would cover everyone with fear or favor, but that we wouldn't cover both sides just to say that we had checked the box. I think, truth trumps everything else, no pun intended. And I think that's really our responsibility as journalists. Now, we don't editorialize, we don't write op-eds on our website. We have no opinion pages, but we treat facts as facts and truth as truth and science and evidence as science and evidence, and we don't pull punches around it. Thanks, Dad.
I pay a lot of attention to Instagram, and I'm very, very sorry that I do. And I think that Instagram is a rush of chaos, misinformation, terrible, terrible things that mean the end of a democracy. How do you feel about that?
Boy, do I have mixed feelings about social media. I mean, social media is a nightmare and also a blessing, right? It depends. So for us, the reach of the 19th stories on Instagram is dramatic. The number of people who share the 19th journalism, who engage with us, who ask us questions, who support us financially because they see us on Instagram is huge. Social media is also disgusting, and it's a cesspool, right? But it's also where most young people are. And so if we want to reach those young people, I mean, most people have left Twitter by now. I have personally left. It's now X, but I've personally left. The 19th hasn't left because we have millions of black women who engage with us on X, on Twitter. I could draw a line in the sand and say, X sucks, social media is a cesspool, I'm gonna leave my headlines off of there. And then I'm abandoning those millions of black women who I may be their primary source of news and information. And so it's really tough because it's a blessing and a curse, and it's mostly a curse. But until we build more direct one-to-one relationships with the next generation of news consumers, it's what we've got. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Jackson Hole at a conference, and the CEO of Instagram had come to agree to this conversation with a bunch of news CEOs. And he was answering all these sort of, tough ethical questions, and then finally, the woman sitting next to me said, "Do you let your kids use Instagram?" And he said, without missing a beat, "Absolutely not." This is the CEO of the company. So they know. They know what it is and what it does. It's also, for many people, an enormous source of news, information, and entertainment. And so if my job is to be everywhere, if my job is to educate and inform as many women as possible, I can't in good conscience boycott it because there's a lot of gross stuff on there. Probably not the answer you want.
So the midterms seems like a long way off. Do you
It's
have
right around the corner. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what the hope is for. You're seeing all these conversations. We were talking about conversations today about Trump saying he wants, Texas lawmakers to redistrict as fast as humanly possible. You're seeing, all these sort of show of force military parades. You're seeing all kinds of people, being incarcerated or pulled into detention with no due process. I'm not confident that the midterms are going to be some bright beacon of hope given all the levers that are being pulled in so many different ways. That said, for the folks who are asking what they can do, it's absolutely the time to be most deeply engaged, and it's right around the corner. It really is.
So Emily, thanks. How do you think we can teach media literacy to the young, to the middle-aged, and to us elderly people so that they understand what they're reading and what they shouldn't be reading?
Yep.
Or should be?
So one of the things I was actually saying to the Instagram CEO when I was with him is I actually think we need some kind of when you buy packaged food and there's a label that tells you all the ingredients in the food and how many calories it has and stuff like that. I actually think we need to institute nutritional labels for content. And we need some sort of verified form that's, particularly with the proliferation of AI, that says, if this was generated by artificial intelligence, there ought to be a disclosure, a safety label on it, right? If this did not come from a verified news source, it ought to have some kind of security or safety label. I do wonder if this rapid push into AI is going to force some of these companies to start grappling with some of these questions. But I think there are organizations starting to do this work. There's an organization called the News Literacy Project that you should look up. They primarily do work with seniors that is aimed at, making sure your grandpa doesn't share that crazy Instagram or Facebook post. We've all been there. That is complete misinformation. There's the Pointer Institute, which is based in St. Petersburg, Florida, but is a journalism entity, is starting to do a lot of, if you've seen PolitiFact, do you know the name PolitiFact?
Yeah.
PolitiFact is really reputable, and they do a lot of sort of real-time debunking. I mean, we may actually get to a point where AI can do some of this fact-checking and debunking for us in real time, which for all the terrible things that AI may do to us, including the loss of the workforce, there may actually be some benefits for fact and news, fact-based news and information. So it's tough. Elementary schools are now, my kids' elementary school has a news literacy for kids where they try to help them figure out what's real and what isn't real. People are trying to tackle this. And then increasingly you're seeing organizations, including ours, but also the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, putting little boxes on stories that explain how they got the story, what the journalist's job was, what the responsibility was, how they got access to this news and information. And I think the more that we can explain the work we do, the better off we're going to be in helping people to trust us. Also, one-on-one relationships, we really believe in live events because I actually think it's important for the public to have access to journalists and understand we're not these sort of like disembodied, bots behind a screen. We're actually real human beings, fallible human beings, but people really trying to get the most accurate news and information we can to the public. So it's not a perfect answer, and this is a really hard time for mis and disinformation. I also really recommend a robust media diet, including news organizations that don't necessarily preach the gospel that you're preaching. We were talking at dinner tonight a little bit about the Bulwark. I don't know if any of you read the Bulwark or pay attention to the Bulwark. I don't love Breitbart, but I think there is some interesting stuff on the Federalist, which is sort of more of a libertarian publication. So if you are a traditional, like a dyed-in-the-wool MSNBC consumer, you gotta get out of your bubble. Because you're not gonna understand the people around you, yes. And you're not gonna be a good news consumer if that's all you're consuming.
Right.
Sure.
Covered a lot of ground, but we have so many explosive issues. Many of them would have an element of risk involved. And how would that focus? You've got a range of young people and all ages, backgrounds and gender, and so at some point, someone's got to evaluate what might be the risk, and if you proceed, how do we handle the risk?
Absolutely. So we have to think about the risk every day now. And that is such a departure for me from my previous roles. And to go a little more in detail, last year we have at the 19th our own FBI agent. We unfortunately had two credible death threats against one of our Black women reporters who's frequently on TV that actually was intercepted by the Postal Service of all places. And we ended up having to pull her off of an event stage, and then they ended up arresting and incarcerating the person who was coming after us. So that's one example. We have two trans reporters on our team who cover trans rights and all this, debate nationally. And people like Tucker Carlson love to put their faces and names on screen on YouTube, and that's led to, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the term doxing, D-O-X-X-I-N-G, which is effectively an attempt to come after journalists and make public their private information, make public their home addresses, things like that. In November, we had to spend $200,000 that we did not have for this to hire a full-time security contractor for the well-being of our team. We got a threat against our reporters at the Republican National Convention, and so we had to pull them out of the hotel where they were supposed to be staying and move them to a different hotel. I mean, this this conversation just like gives me goosebumps just to talk about because it's been so stressful and emotional. And it's incredibly frightening. My journalists, the average age in my newsroom is probably 28. They're young. Many of them, it's their first journalism jobs, and they're operating in an environment. They're just trying to publish stories, and they have to think about all these things. We have a whole protocol now for when we cover protests and when we cover rallies, because my nightmare and also a high likelihood is that I will get a call that a journalist has been detained or a journalist has been injured or someone at a rally has, you cover rallies now, and when you're the media, you are the enemy, truly. It is very frightening to be a journalist at a Trump rally, and to be a woman of color at a Trump rally, woman of color journalist is a total nightmare. And so we have to make decisions about where we go. I mean, we make decisions about whether we actually attend these rallies. We only send reporters and photographers in groups. I no longer send anyone individually out into the field because the risks are too high. And then we're lucky we're in Austin because we have amazing pro bono First Amendment lawyers here we have like 5 of them who are on standby for us. I don't know if any of you know the amazing Julie Ford, but she's phenomenal, an amazing woman lawyer, like legendary woman First Amendment lawyer in Austin. These folks are on speed dial for us. We have a bail fund at the ready. I always know how I can get money and how fast I can get that money out of our bank to try to get people bailed out. But again, the fact that we even have to think about these kinds of things is a departure from the journalism. So it's a 24/7 responsibility just to keep these 60 people safe. Sorry, I know that's dark. It wasn't like this, by the way, just a couple of years ago. This is a very different environment now.
Wasn't it that in the South?
So the South is the worst of all, and that's where a lot of our women of color journalists are based, in Atlanta and Alabama and Texas, obviously. Texas, we have to think about that a lot here. Our fellowship program that I was mentioning, all those HBCU students are almost entirely in the South. And so that's been a really, again, keeping them safe is a whole can of, and a whole other can of worms, because they're brand new baby journalists who I am responsible for. So yes, it's really tough.
Anybody?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
probably ought to let you rest. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you all for your interest. This is really a wonderful room. Thank you all so much for coming. And we should meet right here and be nice to the